Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Scott Shephard is the founder and executive chairman and board member of Green Coffee Company and a partner at Legacy Group. As a PwC alum of nearly a decade, he developed extensive experience in accounting, M&A advisory, and consulting assignments across multiple continents in places like the US, Bermuda, Hong Kong, and Beijing. He moved down to Colombia a decade ago and began running his own business in real estate and agriculture before launching GCC. Cole is an expert in the private capital markets, emerging market economies, the coffee sector, and he's based in Medellin, Colombia. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Corey. Great to be here.
So Cole, listen, such background, obviously the prior experience, the international experience. You're an entrepreneur actually running and operating a company. I'm fascinated with the coffee business and all the deals that surround that. But before we get into any of that, I want to bring you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing, an international M&A consultant, coffee company owner in Colombia. I don't know if those were in the menu back then, but you tell me.
Sure, yeah. When I was a kid, I grew up, both my parents were accountants, right? And so I grew up going on weekends to my dad's office because my dad would work basically 7 days a week. So, Saturdays and Sundays, I might go to the office, learn how to use the old school IBM computer, maybe learn how to play like Snake on the computers. But, I used to think I used to like to be an architect when I was young, certain age at 10 years old, maybe you want to be a pirate and go find buried treasure. But I've always had a yearning, I would say, to go outside of the town I'm in and learn new things. I think I've always been drawn towards business. And probably if I was born 300 years ago, I'd want to be an explorer. I don't know how successful I'd be at doing it, but going new places, learning new things, meeting new people, it's always something I've been interested in.
I love it. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Apex, North Carolina. It's a suburb of Raleigh. So I was born in upstate New York, but grew up since I was about 5 years old in North Carolina.
Love it. Love it. So one other question looking back, what was your first deal of any type? Could have been something when you were much younger or early in your career. You tell me.
Sir, I would say doing deals. I said probably I started investing when I was about 18 years old, doing like self-directed IRAs, learning how mutual funds work, learning how individual securities work. I used to read a tremendous amount about investing. Now, I don't know if starting an E-Trade account when you're 18 really counts as doing deals, but it's more or less similar. I would say I started really getting into more, deal-based activity with PwC when I started on the M&A team I think I joined that team when I was 28. And I had just moved to Hong Kong. The first deal I did there that I actually ran myself was in the US, we have WhatsApp, right, for all your communications. In South Korea, you have a group called Kakao Talk. So they have like a 90% market share. And actually Tencent had bought a pref position in that business, and I ended up doing the diligence on that because between PwC Hong Kong and PwC in South Korea, the buyer is Chinese, the seller is South Korean, and the bridge language was English, actually, to run the deal. So, and no one in the two firms really spoke both South Korean and Mandarin Chinese, or Korean and Chinese. And so I got to run that deal. So that was probably the first real deal I would say I did in my career.
I love it. So what had you get into, I look back now, right? I grew up with in a low middle class family that became an upper middle class family later after, in my young years, it was lower middle class. And, I've become friendly with people like David Bach, who was Neo member out of New York, who wrote Automatic Millionaire and, all these phenomenal investing books. And he talks about his grandma Rose, who bought him his first share of stock when he was young, right? Sure. I didn't give that experience. It wasn't even on my radar. I barely knew what the stock market was before I became a lawyer. Like, what had you invest at 18? And boy, I certainly wish I started investing early.
I think it was probably my parents teaching me how money works. I think I grew up in a similar background probably to you, Corey. My parents were from upstate New York. When you're coming from upstate New York, taking a job in Raleigh, North Carolina, which my dad did when I was 5, these aren't high paying jobs. I mean, we're talking about low 5 figures when I'm 5 years old and my dad is my age now. And, growing up, we didn't have a tremendous amount of money. So they taught me about investment, saving money since I was a young kid. So I grew up with a very business focused background. Like I get to meet my dad's bosses when I go with him on the weekends, and he would teach me a lot of the stuff besides playing baseball and basketball. And my dad teach me how to do that. A lot of it would teach you how to be like a person in the community and how businessmen should react, how you should behave, right? Firm handshakes, look people in the eye, tell the truth. Like a lot of things that we may have forgotten along the way, actually, with some of the business stuff we see and the ethical issues we see in business these days. Sure. But those kind of core concepts that I think are very important in everyday business, if you want to do any business anywhere in the world, I got approached and taught that at a very young age.
Love it. And talk to me a little bit about like the international stuff. You mentioned PwC, Hong Kong. Was that something you pushed for, or did you just get an opportunity? Like what started the international journey for you?
Sure. I actually pushed for it. So I was with, I got out of NC State after my master's degree in accounting. So you get your CPA. I started in RTP, which is a lot of biotech outside Raleigh. And it was between basically you're working in biotech or you're working in the firms that sponsor biotechs, which are venture capital, right? So we had a lot of VC clients. I love the investment space, right? And I love financial services. And I was talking with the firm to say, I want to concentrate more in financial services. As you grow with the firm, you obviously start to specialize in an industry. And my interest really was financial services. And, the roles really for financial services were Chicago and New York. That's where it really was. I mean, this is almost 20 years ago, right? And I wasn't really interested in New York and Chicago, but Cayman and Bermuda were both interesting options. And only Bermuda was hiring at the time. They needed someone on their asset management team. I had a couple years of experience and I was willing to obviously not negotiate salary or anything like that. Just plane ticket, get me over. And I got to start with the asset management and banking team. Every time I went somewhere with the firm, it's really about learning new things, meeting new people, and doing something I would have never got to do if I didn't have the firm sponsoring me, of course. So it was really me pushing for it. There are always opportunities within anywhere in the world, no matter what firm you're in, of course. But I was pushing to learn more about financial services and do something international. So I pushed it.
Love that. So talk to me a little bit more about that journey and what was some of one of the things that's always fascinating to me and why I love, we do some international deals. We have clients that have, whether they have subsidiaries or locations overseas, or foreign companies who are looking to do business in the US, or some of our M&A work involves clients that have locations outside the US. And for me, one of the things that I love are the cultures. I love traveling and learning about other cultures.
Sure.
And then there's certainly cultural differences in business, and that's fascinating to me because I got an early lesson in that. I won't go into super detail because I want to hear your experiences. But when I was like a first year associate at a big firm in New York, we did a deal with a Japanese buyer. And we actually hired a cultural consultant, right?
Sure.
I'm going back to the 80s, so we're usually talking about a time where there was less international,
right, right.
And the Japanese are very, very different culture, and they taught us everything, how to take the business card with both hands and acknowledge it's not just like grabbing and throwing in your pocket and and that kind of stuff. But there was not big, but there was like mumbling whenever, obviously something had not been done right. And literally at the signing table, and it turned out that the consultant had forgotten to let us know that we needed to get nice pens that they would sign the deal with once, then keep as a memento. So we had
Absolutely.
office pens, right? And it was like a big thing. Oh, we screwed that up. So we had to send somebody out. These were the days, you would literally send somebody out to the stationery store and they bought like a nice cross pen back then. And then, so in any case, like talk to me a little bit about that journey around the different cultural, and lessons learned there. And so any good stories in terms of?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like moving to Bermuda. I mean, I had probably done one trip outside the US by the time I moved to Bermuda when I was 25 years old. Literally, I think I had just turned 25. Wow. I got the offer before I turned 25 and I had to be there in 2 weeks. So it's like 2 weeks for my birthday. I think I moved like a day or two after my 25th birthday. And then you're getting there, you're getting assigned to different jobs, you're meeting the new recruits. Because in Bermuda, like everyone who works there is usually expat, right? You're getting recruited from all over the firm in different countries because there's not enough domestic supply. The business in Bermuda is just so huge on the asset management, banking, and insurance side that you need global talent shipped in, basically. So you always have a new recruiting class and you're meeting all of them. And I remember, and I didn't have a lot of experience with people who speak English, but speak it in a different tone, right? And so when you're in a British territory, like a lot of my peers were from either London or Dublin or Northern Ireland or from South Africa or Australia. I mean, a lot of these guys were coming from all the British territories. And I remember my first roommates that I had, we went into this big house in Bermuda, and two of my roommates, one of them was from Dublin and one of them was from Northern Ireland. I can't remember what city he was from, but the one from Northern Ireland, I couldn't understand anything he was saying. He was speaking English, but I couldn't understand anything he's saying. And then it was my real first experience walking through like the different vocabularies with British vocabulary, Australian vocabulary, understand South African English. Like everyone's speaking English, but everyone's using different words for the same things. Same concepts I see down here in Colombia if I'm talking to a Peruvian or Argentinian or Mexican about Spanish words. Everyone uses different words for similar things, and depending on the country of origin you're from, you speak different things. So I had a lot of that, I would say, in Bermuda to start, but it was easier because it was English-speaking nation. But when I moved to Hong Kong, I had a lot more of the experience that you're talking about there, Corey, as well. How do you do business in China? When we did cross-border deals, we were a regional team. So there's only 3 teams all over the world that did what we did. We only did financial services, M&A, and basically we would do coverage roles of all of Asia. So if you weren't in New York or London, basically, and you're in Asia, we're doing that financial services deal for the firm. So, I did deals in Malaysia, Thailand, Dubai. I was in South Korea constantly. We'd look at deals between Japan and Indonesia, Japan and Thailand. And you have to kind of just learn on your feet on how these things go. But yeah, just how you place chopsticks, at lunch matters. Don't point chopsticks at people. Like in Hong Kong, we tap for the tea to thank them due to an old ritual with a really cool old story. I won't bog you down with the story, Corey, because it takes like 7-8 minutes to tell you the story. But there's certain things that you have to do depending on where you're at. And you'll learn kind of on the go. And in Hong Kong is interesting because it wasn't the same kind of recruiting classes as Bermuda. Whereas Bermuda's everyone's new, everyone is from some other territory, largely British territories. Hong Kong was, I'm starting mostly with guys that are coming in from Hong Kong, coming in from mainland China, or coming from a regional role. Maybe you're running the Japan desk for audit or advisory, and you're coming in from Japan, but your sole client base is Japanese. So you're working within like these little silos. So coming in from like Western English speaking world, I think I was like one of 2 when I started. And I think I did that a couple months after I turned 28. I moved to Hong Kong.
Wow. That's phenomenal. Last question on the international piece. And I do want to get to how you got to Colombia and what are you doing now and that kind of
Sure.
stuff. More sort of on the business side, because, it's easy to talk about the cultural differences and whether it's the pens or the chopsticks or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But also, there are significant differences in pace and just, ways that people do get deals done and do business.
Definitely.
And certainly, the classic sort of American get down to business, it's very different. So talk a little bit more specifically about the differences in ways of actually getting deals done as opposed to just more of the small cultural elements that you've experienced.
Sure. I mean, I think some of it is cultural and then some of it's just how deals get done. What I saw, if you were to spend a lot of time in Hong Kong, that's like ultra capitalism. right? I mean, like the average person coming to work, you're there 7 or 8 and you're leaving minimum 8 or 9 at night. And that's the average role. I mean, that could be someone who's just starting all the way up to your 60-year-old partner of a law firm, right? And you're doing it 6 days a week. So it's a more of an aggressive feel, more similar to New York. I think people could argue that Hong Kong is more aggressive than New York in a lot of ways. Like lifestyle's pretty aggressive. But doing deals there is more similar, I would say, to American type culture. Like it's ultra capitalistic. People are there for a reason. There's not as much needing of meet and greet versus transaction flow and wheeling and dealing. In my experience when I was in mainland China is much different, right? It's more slowed down. Like things happen obviously outside of my scope at the time. I'm a young guy doing deals, assisting on diligences, strategy offerings, advisory stuff in the accounting world. But things are based on trust, and they take relationships, and they take a lot longer. Doing the China deals that we would look at, a lot of the deals were done before they would even actually sign the advisors on. The advisors are just kind of there to certify the deal, but basically all material deal terms were already set, agreed upon, handshakes, valuations were already set. And basically you're doing diligences and advisory work, basically just to certify that it's been done. And it's almost like a rubber stamp on a transaction that's already really been agreed. This compensation and consideration hasn't been paid yet. And I would say in every market it is somewhat unique in that aspect. Some of it in Southeast Asia was kind of a mix between those two. And coming down to Latin America is definitely much closer to the mainland Chinese kind of pace. Getting to know buyers on acquisition, sellers on the other side. It takes a lot of time. Things are much more on a relationship base. There is no MLS for buying businesses here in Colombia, for instance, and things go at a slower pace. And even if you want to go at a New York or Hong Kong pace, it's just not. You'll just stress yourself out. You're going to beat your head against a wall, and you need to kind of assimilate and know what you're going after and target it, and know it's going to take some time.
So how did you end up getting to Colombian? Had you done LATAM, stuff like in advance of that? Like, tell us how you got to where you are now.
Absolutely. I was talking with partners at the firm. You have to kind of build a platform and a career path if you want to go to the partner level. So I was in my promotion year for senior manager, which means you're a couple years out from partner track, and you need to start building your revenue model. You need to know how you're going to bring in new clients, what's unique, what's special. Unless you inherit a client book from a partner who's leaving, you need to build your own. And, I liked working in emerging markets. I thought they were interesting. There's a lot of blue sky because a lot of times people don't want to operate from there. The markets are more inefficient. Human capital is inefficient. So anytime there's inefficiencies, there's room to play in, right? If you go to a place like Hong Kong or New York or London, things are uber efficient, and finding arbitrage or finding unique areas, especially when you're in the professional services world, I think is very, very challenging. Guys definitely do it, but it's very, very challenging. And so I was looking to go to emerging market. And, I have a very high risk tolerance as far as doing that. So I was talking to partners and say, look, you can pay me nothing, but just give me a portion of what I bring in. And, when you're, I was 31 at the time talking to partners, and they're like, that's not how this works. We're an accounting firm after all. Like, you're working in the advisory, the more aggressive segment, but ultimately we're an accounting firm. We can't just not pay you and just pay you portions like even most partners, they don't have that zero salary versus revenue split model. It just doesn't really exist nowadays. PwC or Deloitte, E&Y, they're just so large. They're running more of a corporate model now. Anyway, I was looking at a couple markets in Southeast Asia and a couple markets in LATAM. The reason being is the firm only had 3 Nexus centers, of which we did deal flow from. And we had more and more deal flow going into Southeast Asia. The Philippines and Vietnam were having more activity going on. And I thought those are super interesting markets. And we had no partners in country that really specialized in financial services deals. We were basically doing all the deals with audit partners. And, doing deals is a lot different, like kind of skill set than just core audit, right? And we had the exact same circumstance happening in LATAM, right? LATAM market was getting run out of New York. And we didn't have people on the ground really only doing FS deals. And FS was one of the biggest segments that was growing within our M&A, business practice globally. So I talked to partners in Bogota and in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Those were the two they were looking to centralize deals teams with. And I said, okay, I'm going to check those out first. And LATAM was at the top of the list because it was just so underserved versus Southeast Asia. We could actually cover Southeast Asia from Hong Kong, but LATAM getting covered from New York seemed like a massive scope issue, right? We could actually centralize teams down there. So I went down to what my brother had. He had 2 weddings. He had one in America, in the US, in North Carolina, a second one in Cartagena in Colombia. And, I was up on my 3rd year in Hong Kong with the FS M&A team, came down to Colombia, and I started just checking out the market just to see what I thought. I had some friends of friends that showed me around Colombia, showed me around Cartagena, showed me around Medellin, took me to Bogota. And it was way more developed than I thought it would be, way more sophisticated than I thought it would be. And I said, this looks to have opportunity. And, the things with the firm always takes a lot longer. You pitch to a partner, it might take a month to receive something. Everything takes time. And I was looking to do something immediately. So I started looking at, when I was there, I was like, man, we could do some real estate stuff. I'm seeing anomalies in valuations of, let's say, whether it's multifamily or single family, I guess, condos and apartments here. I won't get into the boring details, but they basically have weird stratas, which is they rate an area of a city based on how nice it is theoretically. And then all of the property pricing kind of, I guess, correlates to what this arbitrary number is. And that's how they price utilities and whatnot. So the theme is you can have 2 houses that are exactly the same, one right here, one right here. This one's strata 6, this one's strata 4 being lower, and you might have a 30 or 40% discrepancy on real estate pricing, right? But there is no MLS, there's no data. So I came down and I said, look, I think we can, this is a reasonable something to start with, right? I'll liquidate all my real estate or all my retirement funds, all the 401ks, and I'll come down and start doing my own deals and see where I get to. The worst case scenario is I learned Spanish really well and I can come back and do M&A with PwC again.
Love it. So, listen, I'm a born entrepreneur myself. I was running business since I'm 15. I get to mentality, and I love talking to folks like you. It's why I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization and meet, entrepreneurs from all over the world. It's fun. And a lot of people are like, what? You just decided, it's phenomenal. So talk to me a little bit about, all right, so I want to go back, but then I'm going to come forward. So talk about financial services deal, right? Office deals. What types of financial services business, what was the focus there? Sure. And was some of them related to real estate or did that come out of,
Yeah, my focus was financial services. So it'd be banking, bank buys another bank or PE firm buys a bank, insurance companies, asset managers. I've done some trust companies as well, which is more of a structuring business, but also trust in Hong Kong. It's more like an open financial services license, more similar to a bank, insurance company, and asset manager all bundled together. And then we also did real estate deals. So, there'd be some buildings. For instance, I was involved in 1 or 2 real estate deals in Shenzhen that we would do a diligence on buying a skyscraper, right? Those are more simplistic deals, like doing a deal on a real estate valuation or how you're going to have offloads by floor or by unit is much easier transaction than how are you going to value an insurance book for a Pan-Asian business. The biggest deal I was ever a part of was ING's divestiture. And I remember working on the South Korea portion of that. I think that was that was about an $8 billion US divestiture from Asia. But, we did stuff down all the way to the smallest deals I probably would be a part of at PwC. Maybe it would be $500 million probably. On some of maybe the small banking or small insurance deals. But most deals, by the time you're engaging a PwC or someone who's assisting on diligence and strategy and advisory work, usually you're above that $1 billion range. So you're usually in that 1 to 5 billion range is the deal flow we'd really look at.
Yeah. So now you start doing real estate in Colombia. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, the deals at the beginning were probably a little smaller than
you at
PwC level, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. When you're trading on your own book, Corey, I took out all the money out of my pension funds and all the stuff that you save until you're 31. It's enough to get going. The theme was, can I prove thesis? Can I come out and do something? And I knew I had contacts that I could go back to and raise capital from if I needed to, right? If I could prove that I could get something going, you get a little platform going. Can you go raise capital? And that's ended up what happened, just not with core real estate. As I kept developing businesses here in Colombia, it moves from real estate into, hey, this commodity trading looks kind of interesting. Maybe we start trading coffee, fresh cut flowers. And I had a couple of trading companies that I'd set up in Hong Kong before I left. You're doing triangulations between US companies, Colombian companies, and I would do US trades, South Korea trades, Japan trades, build a little trading team down here in Colombia, which is an interesting trade corridor that most people didn't have access to. And it was fun, but it was more of a learning experience to kind of bring you to the next level and say, okay, how do you take this further? How do you make a real business? And that's when we got introduced to starting Green Coffee.
All right. So let's talk about that. First of all, one other question. A lot of the wisdom you hear from anybody who knows is that, hey, if you're going to do business internationally, especially in a place where, you haven't been, you need local partnership, right? If you don't have somebody on the ground local so when you first started in the real estate stuff or with the commodity stuff or even with the coffee company, was that true for you? Or how did you handle being an outsider, so to speak, coming in? You get local partners or local relationships?
Absolutely. So when we first started, I started doing the real estate arbitrage. Really what I'd focus on is they call them juzgado, which would be the equivalent of like a bankruptcy sale. So juzgado is what you'd go to and bid on a bankruptcy scale. But this bankruptcy sales here are very, very inefficient, and they only have a few you'll see the same faces every single time. And there's certain elements of it. It's not really a fair transaction because it's such an illiquid market. And, I built a little team of 2 guys that we would study the bankruptcy books and understand where we think the valuation would be. We kind of map out the city because the level of data we get, Corey, is very poor, but they would trade at such low pricing that it made sense. So, but the issue is you'd always have these continuances with the judges and whatnot. Somebody comes in with a sob story, and so you're ready to buy a property, but it gets a continuance at the last second, right? And you have to actually put up the money before you can bid. And it's a very bureaucratic process. But it taught me a lot about how Colombia works, how real estate works here, how the judicial process works, which is a great learning experience. But more to answer your question, absolutely, Corey. You have to have local teams. So throughout all the businesses I've done here in Colombia, I would say by far the biggest proportion of the teams will be Colombian versus anyone was an outsider. And if you weren't Colombian, you'd have to have a good value prop of why you're there, for sure.
Yeah, love it. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, so let's talk about Green Coffee Company. How did that come about, from the journey that you've taken on us so far, and tell us about the company?
Sure. So basically we got approached by a group of real estate investors who wanted exposure to an ag deal, right? It was kind of an upcoming asset class at the time. I'd say it's pretty standardized now. This is almost 10 years ago. This is 2017 when we're talking about this. And what they were seeing is better cap rates on ag than they're seeing in multifamily, right? So we had groups that were already doing multifamily, small hotels here in Medellin and Bogota, and all foreign capital, all US high net worth capital. And they wanted specifically an agricultural product. And so at the time, I was heavily researching, I was doing coffee trading on my own book, and we were looking at cacao. And actually, cacao is a really interesting market because it's really dominated by a couple West African countries that are very small, and they drastically need more cacao. Fast forward to today, if you watch commodity pricing over the last couple of years, cacao has gone crazy. And it's because of the issues with production in Ghana and Ivory Coast, which makes up almost 80% of the world's production. So an original thesis was like, hey, cacao is interesting, but I'm also in Colombia, and investors need to understand the product. And Colombian or and outside investors, especially Americans, understand Colombian coffee. So Colombian coffee I would say from a capital aspect and a solicitation of capital aspect is much easier to sell than cacao was. And in coffee, we can get started immediately. There's already coffee estates that we could buy versus cacao is pure greenfield. And the gestation period is, 6-7 years to get going. So that kind of almost like a zero coupon bond approach is a much harder sell off the bat for a small startup project than coffee was. So, when we first started, it was a typical agricultural play. We'd say buy at a somewhat consolidated existing farming estate, consolidate agriculture or the infrastructure to process better than your competitors alongside you do, and then sell us a little bit further down the value chain as far as you can get. If you can skip out some of the intermediaries in Colombia, you'll make a few pennies more, and obviously you can get more yield. So it started off really as that yield product, which then as we dove in more, we found, well, there's way more inefficiencies in the market than we thought there was going to be. It should not be just an asset play that we're looking here. This should be an enterprise, right? We should create a real enterprise, invest in the company, invest in the people, and really do something unique here in Colombia and become the national leader with a goal to really become a global leader in both the production of coffee, processing of coffee, and then vertical integration all the way to creating roasted coffee and selling it in the millions of pounds, which is the stage we're at today.
Wow, that's amazing. And so it's interesting for you, like how much of from a investor deal maker to an operator did you go, or did you just have a team that operated it and you've always stayed passive? Because obviously there's a big difference when you come in to it as an investment and then you find that you're building and operating a company.
Absolutely. When I started, my role was a lot more on capital raise, doing the investor presentations, meeting with investors, getting them comfortable. I would say overall corporate strategy and structuring. And then we would get a whole team, really an all Colombian team. And I would interview management. We would pick out the ones we think were best, but it was not as hands-on as probably it is today, even. I mean, sometimes I would slot in back then. I have to be a green coffee salesman, and you'd switch around to, we started with a little under $6 million in investment. And so when you start with a small capital stack, you can only do so much. So I'd slot into roles as necessary. But nowadays, I still do all the investor side. I still do all the strategy side. But nowadays, we take a much more active role than I would say like an average private equity manager would do. I mean, we'll do weekly meetings with every team lead. We'll determine marketing strategy for our product. If we look at new acquisitions, whether it be businesses, assets, or otherwise, we'll run those. So as a partner in Legacy, we get in deep into the details of green coffee for sure. But you're right. I mean, the transitioning from a background of doing deals and investment side to learn the operation side, that's a kick in the face that you need to do every day. And it takes years. I've been doing it now almost 10 years within Colombia or 10 years in Colombia, almost 10 years within coffee. And you're learning new stuff every day. Right? Every day you're learning new stuff. But as you're in it every single day in every aspect of the business, you'll learn quick.
Let me ask something. Somebody who wouldn't know any better, especially, going back 10 years ago, might have some misimpressions. Somebody might, like if you said to a lot of people in the US at least, hey, I'm going to open this coffee company in Colombia and I'm in Medellin, some people might say, okay, first of all, hasn't Colombia been in coffee forever? Like, how are you going to break in there? And second of all, like what's going on with the drug cartels and
totally.
Right. I mean, that would be, the only thing a lot of people would have, what the reality on those two fronts are, because Colombia's come a long, long way, certainly on the drug issue and safety issue and whatever. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Corey. I mean, like the conversations I have with investors today are light years different than conversations I had with investors in 2017. And I'll tell you, like probably the number one question I'd get, Corey, in 2017 is like, how do I know you're not going to steal this money? Right? Literally, that would be that, because like you want to start a grouping of coffee assets of which you're going to sell. And all the business models sound solid, but you're operating out of Medellin, Colombia. How do I know? And you remember, I only use high net worth capital from the United States. Really, that's all my capital source. So most of these people who invest with us have never been to Colombia. before, right? Or some of them have been down, they fall in love with it, and then they look for investments afterwards. But really, they don't have knowledge of how things operate on the ground, everything else, right? Nowadays, the biggest questions I'll get is, are we still on track for an IPO in the next 2 or 3 years? Right? Because they're very much return focused, right? Return focused. How's the business going? Is the strategy playing out? How's the vertical integration going? How's the launch of the Juan Valdez brand going in the United States? So it's much more similar, I would say, to public company investor questions now versus, are you going to steal my money? And is Colombia full of crazy people that are doing silly things? Which obviously that last question is, it's not, right? We wouldn't be able to operate if it was a crazy place.
Yeah, it's really, in terms of the drug issue, all kind of stuff, it's come a long way. I know a lot of people who are doing some really interesting stuff. And across Latin, but certainly, Colombia had a particular reputation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's when, Corey, we get investors come down. I think I have another group coming down in a couple of weeks that want to chat about Colombia, talk about investing in Colombia, and I'll host them at our offices. And it's one of the ones because they'll watch Narcos on Netflix and they'll think that's still what it is, right? But it's not. A lot of what you'll see, a lot of guys out there wanted to do PE, they want to do private deals, but a lot of them don't want to leave New York or San Fran or Chicago or whatever. If you're willing to come down to places like Colombia that have been cut off from capital pools for so long, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. Now, you need to show up and you need to come correct with capital and people that can understand the businesses and be ready to suffer a bit by getting used to bureaucracy and local business, and things just don't go as fast as you want to go. But there's a tremendous amount of industries that if you can bring institutional or even semi-institutional capital and you come in with a great background and you're willing to run businesses, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity all over LATAM, but I would say especially in Colombia due to the problems they had 30 years ago. That obviously will suppress a lot of capitalistic activity. A lot of just basically family businesses are running things that really aren't looking to innovate. They're looking everything to stay the same. And so the ability to come in and find a niche is readily available. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to build a multinational, giant from a Colombian, let's say, middle-class client base, but there's a lot of areas that you can make international businesses from Colombia. Are you going to make the next $10 billion unicorn? Up in the air whether that's possible. But to run legitimate businesses, especially in real assets, tremendous amount of opportunity throughout LATAM, I would say.
Yeah, love that. So you threw something in there that I don't want to skip past, which is you mentioned Juan Valdez and the brand and the US or whatever. So tell us what's going on there.
Sure. So last year, we were awarded the license basically to represent Juan Valdez in the United States and Canada. So you'll see a big launch of it this year, actually. We're doing a big launch of Juan Valdez. So if you're my age and above, so I'm 41, right? And so we grew up with Juan Valdez, like watching the Super Bowl, like halftime show videos, we have Juan Valdez commercials, right? Well, the tap kind of got turned off, or the marketing tap kind of got turned off about 20 years ago. They stopped investing as much. And the grouping that really loves that asset, I would say that 40 years up and above age group in the United States still sees Colombia as the best coffee in the world. To me, that's a huge value potential. And so we saw that. We presented that to the heads of the Coffee Federation. We closed this deal about a little under a year ago, which took over a year to negotiate this deal. And due to our scale in the market, we are the largest consolidated coffee grower in the country. We work hand in hand with the Coffee Federation on, let's say, testing new varietals of coffee. How do you manage people better? How should we look at coffee in a macro sense across Colombia and also in a macro sense in Latin America? And so we have access to the top guys and we say, look, we think we can bring in more value if we can rep the brand in the United States and in Canada. We want to do a big brand launch. We want to spend some marketing dollars, and we think we can do some special stuff. And we presented why we did that and when we got the opportunity to do so. So you'll see it right now. We closed the Chicago Cubs, Juan Valdez, presented by GCC, is now the Chicago Cubs official coffee. So if you go to Wrigley this year, you'll be seeing our coffee there. We've also just closed a big deal in LA that you'll see publicly announced. I was assuming by the time this podcast comes out, you'll be seeing it in the public press. So you're seeing at the big stadium in LA, you'll be seeing our coffee, right? And so we'll be doing some big box stores. I'm hoping within the next 2 quarters or so. You'll see us coming on more retail shelves, and it's going to be very, very exciting. So we have, it's a tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of effort for our team. But I would say, that's one of the biggest activities we have planned for 2025 is really blasting Juan Valdez in the US and Canada this year.
Love that. And the other thing I love is one of the things I talk about on this podcast, and it's what I talk about with my clients, and even I run the Deals Conference and Community for Entrepreneurs Organization. Mm-hmm. And everybody in all of those contexts, one of the messages I keep trying to bring is, hey, deals are not just raising capital and doing M&A. Yes, those are two of the biggest types of deals out there, and ones you should consider and whatever. But there's all these other types of deals, joint ventures, strategic alliances, online affiliate deals, and licensing. Yes. And I think licensing deals are in some ways really underutilized, and it's a great business. One of the things, listen, I don't want to get into politics, but whenever you think about Donald Trump, I've been following him since the 90s. And what people don't realize is people have arguments that don't understand his business model for the most part, which is that they say, the Trump University, Trump Steaks went out of business, whatever. You don't understand. Those are licensing deals. He doesn't run any of those companies. Even the buildings are licensing deals. He gets paid to put his name on stuff, right? That was his business for a long time. Again, I'm just using that as an example, not that I know that's a terrible name to bring up, by the way. But it's important to understand, because the thing about licensing, you're doing it differently. You're actually operating a business. You also raise capital, whatever. But if you're purely in a licensing business, you actually don't even, and then you're the licensor, right? You're the licensee. You don't need a lot. If you're able to establish a brand, you don't have a lot of operations. You don't have a lot of people, right? Your job is to keep that brand up. So the only reason I raise that is because I love we have guests on that do other types of deals that help our entrepreneurial business leaders, et cetera, audience get out of the box of what kind of deals they want to do. Because even if you're super successful at raising capital doing M&A, there may be licensing opportunities or strategic alliance opportunities or affiliate opportunities that you're not taking advantage of. And, I encourage people not to get stuck in one given deal type.
I agree with you 100%, Corey. I think you need to almost remain agnostic when you're running businesses and say, what are the opportunities I have in front of me and how do I accomplish that goal? Like any given time, like right now, I probably have 2 or 3 M&A deals I'm looking at from business perspective. I have asset deals I'm looking at right now. I have a JV deal that we're looking at right now on byproducts, and you're consistently reviewing these, and they're all basically the same thing in that, how do I make my business stronger, right? Is the deal consideration reasonable? Is the counterparty trustworthy? Does this get me to the next level of the game? Right. And is this where I want to go? And so I agree with you completely. If you were just going to say, I run the M&A department for this corporate group and I only care about M&A, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right transaction to do. It's a transaction, but a lot of times the right transaction to do is no transaction at all. Right. And so you need to consistently get what's the flow of opportunities, I would say, coming towards us. And how do I obviously outbound and say, how do I get more opportunities? And have everything just coming in a flow to you and say, how do I accomplish this if I want to do it? And what's the top opportunity I can go for?
Yeah, and I love the way you put that. It's very good. There's a talk that I do. I did it. It's in Singapore at the Global Leadership Conference for Yale last year, and at the Deal Exchange Conference. And it's called "Is a Deal for That," right? And it actually starts with the pain point, issue, or opportunity you're trying to solve. I'm having trouble hiring. Okay, there's a deal for that, right? Yes. Yeah, it could be an acquisition, could be an acqui-hire, which isn't really even an M&A deal. It's just that, yes. So to come from the place of the business need, right? Issue, challenge, frustration, or opportunity, and say, and trust that, and by the way, you don't have to do a deal like you said, right? There are ways to organically try to hire people, right? You can whatever.
Sure.
But to understand that there is probably a deal for that, or maybe multiple types of deals for that you should at least have on the menu to consider.
Definitely.
As an opportunity is the mindset shift that talk I give is trying to, and it's, it's exactly what you're saying. And I love the fact, raise capital, do an M&A, joint ventures, licensing, all of the stuff you mentioned, that's phenomenal. Love it.
I agree. It's a logical mindset to have, Corey. Your job is to make the business stronger, get it to the next level of the game. And how do you do that? And I love the point you bring up, like acquisition of human capital. I've seen whole companies get bought just for the acquisition of capital. If you looked at on the historical financials, you'd say, what are you possibly doing? And say, I paid $5 million for this company because this guy can't quit. And I bought 30 people for this one guy. And I've seen that transaction happen before. And actually, when you actually find out why they do the transaction, you say, that's not a bad idea. You don't always have the typical, I need to pay 10 times EBITDA of this company, and this is how it's all going to make sense. You always look at the opportunity or the problem you're trying to solve, and does the transaction or deal solve that issue? And then does the consideration make sense for that, whatever you're trying to solve? It's smart.
Love it. All right. Before I ask you my final two questions, is there any, I know this is an open-ended question, but is there anything we haven't covered, whether it's about, what's going on in your business or whether what you're seeing in international business trends or, anything else you want to bring to the audience?
Sure. I think I'm seeing more and more, I would say, deal makers, capital, looking at international deals for sure. In public market, what I'm seeing is, you're seeing a concentration in U.S. public markets. Like if you're going to take a company public, if you're not looking at U.S. markets, there's something wrong. Don't use any of these small exchanges. The liquidity pools are too small. I think you're going to see a really interesting boost in the new administration here. I'm assuming SEC regs might get loosened up a little bit. You're gonna see a lot of deal flow in the public markets. But in the private markets, I think a lot of the activity that people should be looking at is outbound from developed nations. When I go to different markets, you can throw a stone and find unique businesses. For instance, here to get raising in Colombia, you already need to be profitable. I can't tell you the amount of VC money or early stage PE money that people will throw around in the US of companies that aren't even making money, right? They're still testing business models and Series B raises. So, but in a place like Colombia, you could get in at what would be a company development of a Series C, Series D raise, and you can get in at pre-seed financing valuation rounds, right? And so I think it's an underlooked sector. I think more capital is going to be looking at it. But I would encourage deal makers who listen to your podcast, Corey, take a look at developing nations for sure.
Love that. Cole, if people want to find out more about you, about Green Coffee Company, about everything you're involved in, where do they go?
Sure. So website for Legacy Group is www.legacy-group.co. And then Green Coffee Company is www.greencoffeecompany.com. And so we'll have all our contact information. If anyone wants to reach out to me, if you write us a note on either one of those websites, I can always get back to you. Or you could always find me on LinkedIn or any other source probably.
Awesome. So Cole, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world, from people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Sure. So I would say that's the reason I love entrepreneurship so much, is the freedom aspect of it. And especially with time, right? The freedom to be able to movement, very important. Freedom to run the businesses you want, very important. But also the freedom to spend time in the way that you want to spend time, especially I think, Corey, you and I probably have a similar background in professional services. You sell a lot of time for money in that business, and you always make money, but you're selling a lot of your life to do so. So have a bit of freedom and flexibility in doing things that you want to do in the place you want to do it with the people that you want to be around. That to me is freedom that entrepreneurship can provide.
Yeah, I love it. And listen, that's why I never wanted to be a solo practitioner. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. It happens to run a law firm.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Sitting and billing your own time is not freedom.
No, it's not freedom. It's freedom. You'll make some money, but it'll add up. It'll take time off the life for sure.
No question. Cole Shephard, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to cupforlaw.com. That's cupforlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.